All right. So I want to start today with a chant again in Sanskrit. But before I do that, I want to give you the translation. And the translation says, that is full. This is full. From fullness arises fullness. And if you take away fullness from fullness, only fullness remains. Some people translate it as wholeness, but I think the correct translation is full. All right, so this is how the chant goes. Om Purnam Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnamada Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So as we speak today, we hold this wisdom that there is a wholeness that cannot be broken apart, that will always remain whole. And that is in our co-presence, no matter how hard, how difficult a material we are delving in. That wholeness still remains, it still holds. And with that, leaning into that wholeness, if you will, let us go to Saturday morning, February 28th, 2026, 22 days ago, 9:30 a.m., the southern Iranian city of Minab. And I imagine a mother who's just sent her daughter to school. Maybe she braided her hair, maybe they fought over breakfast. Maybe she watched this kid as she's running to school. She watches from the doorway and thinks, who is this being I have created? What is her life? Who's she going to become? 9:30. 10 o'clock, the missiles come. The mother has just gotten ready to go to work. It's a work day on Saturday in Iran. Instead, the sirens are wailing. She and many, many other parents run to the school. The school, interestingly, was called Shajareh Tayyebeh, which means the good tree, or the pure tree. When they arrive, maybe 10:30, maybe 11, depending on the crowd, there's nothing left but rubble. No children, no teachers. 167 children between the ages of 7 to 12, dead. The only color in the rubble are these colorful backpacks that are poking out. Pink, purple, blue, red. For this mother, that was the day, that was the time when everything was cleaved. There is a before and there's an after. And in that after, her child is gone forever. And for us, this was done with our tax dollars, by our government, in the name of our security. We did not approve it, but it happened in our name. So the invitation right now is to just sense, where do you feel it? Not how wrong it is, not what should we do, but where does it land in your body? land in your sternum, in your heart, in your belly. Maybe the knees feel weak. Maybe the feet want to run away. Where does it land in the body? Because once we allow it to land in our bodies, the next few moments are really, really, really important. Because as human beings designed to survive, we are very likely to want to do one of two things. Either we numb, because it's just too much. We were not designed, our bodies were not designed for this, what I call industrial grade grief. We were not designed to hold 165 children dead in our name. Or we drown. We're so filled with the sorrow, the grief, the guilt, that we become waterlogged. We can't move. And it is no longer pure grief at that point. It's just inability to do anything at all. Inability to feel, inability to act. And we also know that this is not the last time this has happened. This will happen again and again and again. So the question that I want to hold today with you all is, how do we build a container that can hold all of this and neither collapse nor crack nor run away, but stay with what is? And through that, maybe a solution will arise, but something that we cannot push for it to happen. And the image that I have for this is an old alchemical image, that of the crucible. So the ancient alchemists, they would carry out these very complex reactions where they would bring two things that cannot sit together, two opposing energies, mercury and sulfur, for example. And they would apply very, very high heats to this container until something happens, until something that was not possible becomes possible, something transforms. That's the alchemical transformation, or the word they used was transmutation. But for that to happen, you have to have a container, the crucible, that will not crack, that will not break apart, but will hold all that heat, all that pressure, all that energy. I remember when we were in high school, in 11th and 12th grade, in chemistry class, we were actually assigned crucibles to do reactions. So at the beginning of the year, our teacher would assign us a crucible, and at the end of the year, she would take it back, and the request was, please return it intact, don't break it. And the way she tested whether the crucible was broken or not, when we were returning it, was not by inspection, not by looking, because there can be hairline fractures that you don't see. What she would do is she would hold the crucible about this big, and she would hit it with a steel spatula. And if it rang, then it was intact. If there was a dull thud, that means something had cracked in it. So let's just let that image land in our bodies. When we hear the story of Minab, when we hear the story of the mother, does the crucible ring, or is it a dull thud? And let's not play the blame game, or the shame game, or the guilt game, because they're not very helpful. They paralyze us. But what can I do to create an alchemical crucible that will ring with the story. So some transformation can happen, something new can arise. So one way to think about it is the question we're asking today is an acoustic question. It's a question of sound. Do we ring or do we thud? And what can I do to try and ring? And for that, I want to talk about the crucible itself. What is it? But before I do that, I want to just very briefly touch upon a teaching that some of the Buddhist teachers talk about, which is a beautiful teaching metaphor. They talk that in Buddhism, they speak about the dove as kind of the spiritual maturity. And the dove flies on two wings. One wing is compassion, karuna, and the other wing is pragya, which is wisdom or discernment. And the teachers say that the dove cannot fly without both the wings working in unison. You cannot have just compassion, you cannot have just discernment. You need both. And they have to work together, they have to be balanced. What I find so interesting is that the alchemical story is actually quite similar. And that tells me that there's something universal in the wisdom. So what is this crucible, this thing where the reaction is happening? What is it made of? So one of the major components of the crucible is clay. And clay, as you know, is soft, it's generous, it can take any shape. You can shape it into a container because it has clay in it. So clay is something like what I would call in the spiritual life our heart work, our feeling work, our compassion. Compassion literally means feeling with or suffering with somebody. Compassion. So that's the clay component of the crucible. But if you make a crucible of clay alone, it'll crack at high heat. So there's a second component added, which is graphite. And graphite can withstand very high temperatures. You know it conducts electricity. It's a very robust material. And we can think of the graphite in our spiritual work as discernment, as meditation, as contemplation, as trying to understand what in this is mine. And how do I understand this situation? How do I cognize this situation? And when the graphite and the clay are in good balance, we have a robust crucible. Right? So we need, again, the Buddhist teaching of the two wings, the compassion and discernment. Both are needed for the dove to fly. But in alchemy, there's a third thing. In making of the crucible, there's a third thing. And this is spectacular. They called it grog. And grog is actually broken down ceramics. So it could have been an old crucible, it could have been a pot, it could have been something else which has already gone through fire. Has the water leached out of it. So once that object breaks, the alchemist would say, okay, let's take this, its job in this cycle is done, let's crush it into a powder. And the grog, you would add only a little bit to the mix of clay and graphite. You don't need a lot of grog. That's such a beautiful image, right? I have a teacher who I studied with for a while, and she had this saying which was actually very wise. And what she would say is, you do not make salad with basil. You put a few leaves of basil in the salad, you don't make a basil salad. And it is not just because basil is pungent, but it is strong medicine. And you need to honor strong medicine. You don't put a lot of it. But a little bit will completely transform your salad. Grog is like that. Again, in the spiritual language, I would say grog is the places where we have been broken in the past, where we have gone through fire, and we have somehow mended, maybe not perfectly, likely not perfectly, but we have come through fire. And all of us have come through fire, multiple fires. Can we take that, like the ancient alchemist, grind it up, and just put a sprinkling of it? We don't want too much, because that's the problem of some forms of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, is this digging, like John O'Donohue used to call, like digging the scab up constantly so nothing can heal. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking, we have broken places in us, and instead of excavating to find what is broken, find the grog, it might be worthwhile to just stop and ask, what's present now? Which memory comes up? That may be the grog that we need for this container right now, for this crucible. And maybe we need each other to calibrate our grog, right? Because we're not often the best judge of what part of our grog is useful for this and what is not. And that's why we need each other to tell us when it's too much, when it's too little. And when the three are in the right proportion, then you have the crucible. But that is not the end of the path of the crucible. That's the beginning of the crucible. So you have added your clay, your graphite, whatever amount of grog was necessary, maybe by trial and error, maybe your apprentice told you it's too much. And now we have it. So the next step is to let it dry. And they would often let it dry for days or weeks, so that the water can escape slowly, not fast, again, to prevent cracks. And then they would put it through graded fire. So start with low temperatures and slowly raise temperature. Again, the idea is let things congeal in their own time, let things happen slowly. There's a saying in alchemy, which is just gorgeous. They call it festina lente, make hurry slowly. And that is such an important lesson, especially for us, the 21st century people. We do not know how to do festina lente. Once that has happened, once the crucible has been fully tempered, then we begin the work, the opus. They often called the alchemist's life work as opus magnum, the great work. And it happens, it starts with the crucible, and it is also said and written in these texts that the more work you do in a crucible, the better the crucible becomes. So a new crucible is not as good as an old crucible because it has layers and layers of residue in it. Makes it stronger, makes it complex, makes it able to do the great work. So again, the invitation is for us to take this metaphor and make this ours. How do we face this political situation, this social situation, this heartbreak, and turn it into a crucible that can survive the fires, that can survive the heat, that can hold the two opposing things, the feeling, the heartbreak for the mother in Minab, and the anger, the outrage, the frustration that this was done in our name. And we don't try to resolve it too quickly. We hold that tension, and we create a crucible that is able to hold that tension. In terms of grog, the other thing that I wrote, and I forgot to say it, so I'll say it now. There's another word in alchemy which is very beautiful. It's called pharmakon. The word pharmacy comes from pharmakon. And pharmakon meant both medicine and poison. It was the same substance. The difference is the dosage and the intention. Same with our brokenness, our grog. It's the dosage and the intention that matters, not the fact that we have it. And this is, to me, this is gold, because we are saying that our brokenness is not only not a problem, it is in fact material. It is something we need to build the crucible. That's extraordinary. That's extraordinary for me to just contemplate that. And the more we do the work, the more we have maybe some failed experiments even, the patina builds. There's residue that lives in that crucible. And so when we take the crucible, we hit it with something hard, it rings. It does not thud. And if it thuds, that's not the end of the world either, because we can still repair it, we can still put it through the fire. That's the alchemist's life. Yep, so bringing it back to the spiritual language, we are asked to hold these two opposites. One says, you're vast, held in something that cannot be destroyed, continuous with the river and the stars and the unnameable ground of being. And you are this body in this seat, in this moment in history, with this specific grief, which is real, which matters, and which you're not permitted to transcend your way out of. That is spiritual bypass. If the heartbreak of that mother in Minab no longer touches my heart, that is not spiritual maturity. That is closing down. That is shutting down. And the last thing I want to reiterate is that the mother in Minab is in her own crucible. Her child is dead. We are not in that crucible. We do not get to appropriate her crucible. But we are in our crucible because her child is dead because our government did something in our name, with our money. That's how the two experiments are connected. How do we hold that without collapsing in grief, without saying it's too much and I don't want to think about it? How do I create a crucible that every time a Minab happens, it can ring clear and loud? That is our invitation. That is full, this is full. From fullness arises fullness. And if you take away fullness from fullness, only fullness remains.